Ever wonder what keeps hundreds of tons of metal in the sky? It is not jet fuel, it is data. Millions of lines of code. Pull the wrong plug on a toaster. You lose breakfast. But when an arrogant heir strips the keys to aviation data to impress his fiancée, he signs a death warrant for an empire. Let me tell you how I let an entire airline burn itself to the ground in exactly 24 hours. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to be completely honest with you today because YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us with zero budget to keep this channel running. Because of this, we will absolutely not upload any new videos here in the near future, and we must transition completely to Patreon. If you find today's story compelling, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear even better, much longer exclusive true stories that detail situations we cannot make public on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's disaster. And by the way, my name is Everly Warren. The temperature inside the central server hub of Apex Meridian Airlines in Chicago was always locked at exactly 64 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment, and I preferred it that way. Row after row of towering black server racks hummed with a deafening, monotonous roar, processing the digital lifeblood of a massive logistics empire. I sat at the master terminal, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard as the green glow of terminal text reflected in my glasses. I was in the middle of executing the daily encrypted API synchronization. This was not some routine computer checklist. This was the mandatory federal handshake. Every single day, I compiled the maintenance statuses, the engine diagnostics, and the structural avionics reports for our entire fleet of 120 heavy cargo aircraft. I then encrypted that data and transmitted it directly to the Federal Aviation Oversight Board. Without this precise, flawless data transfer, the federal government would ground the planes. It was a system built on absolute compliance, zero margin for error, and cold, hard facts. The heavy security door hissed open, breaking the steady, comforting rhythm of the room. I did not even need to turn around to know who had just violated my sanctuary. The sterile scent of ozone and chilled copper was instantly overpowered by a thick, suffocating cloud of bespoke floral perfume. It was Julian Vance. He was the son of our chief executive officer, a man who had been handed an executive vice president title as a graduation gift. He strode into the room wearing a tailored suit that likely cost more than my annual rent, radiating the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his entire life. Clinging to his arm was Sloane. She was his fiancée, a lifestyle influencer whose greatest life achievement was amassing 2 million followers by posting aesthetically pleasing avocado toast and curated vacation outfits. She was currently on a crusade to legitimize her personal brand, desperately craving a corporate director title to stick on her social media bio so she could pretend she was a real businesswoman. Julian stopped right behind my ergonomic chair and crossed his arms. "Everly," he said, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "Stand up. You are fired. Effective immediately." I paused my typing. The cursor blinked steadily on the black screen. I turned my chair around slowly to face them. I did not ask why. I knew trying to extract logic from Julian was a complete waste of breath, but his massive ego could not handle my silence, so he offered the explanation anyway. "Apex Meridian is modernizing," he declared, gesturing vaguely at the massive server racks as if they were just outdated interior decor. "We need a more aesthetic and friendly mindset for the compliance interface. The board and our investors want leadership that aligns with our new, approachable brand vision. Therefore, I am handing the position of Chief System Compliance Engineer over to Sloane." Sloane stepped forward, holding a ridiculously oversized designer handbag in one hand and an iced matcha latte in the other. She leaned over my shoulder, staring at the complex cascading lines of SQL queries and encrypted hex codes on my dual monitors. She let out a dramatic sigh of disgust. "This is just awful," she whined, pointing a manicured fingernail at the screen. There are way too many dry numbers. It looks so depressing and intimidating. How is anyone supposed to feel inspired working with this? I am going to transition this entire department to a highly visual, intuitive color management software. We need soft palettes, intuitive drag and drop features, and a workspace that promotes positive energy. I simply stared at her. She was talking about the maintenance and safety records for massive aluminum tubes flying at 35,000 feet, carrying highly volatile cargo over populated cities. She wanted to manage federal safety protocols with soft palettes and positive energy. The sheer, blinding ignorance radiating in the room was so dense it felt physically suffocating. These two silver spoon amateurs were standing inside the digital nervous system of an aviation empire. Treating it like a messy closet, they wanted to redecorate for a photo shoot. I did not react. I did not argue. I did not try to explain the catastrophic mistake they were making. When people are that committed to their own delusion, trying to educate them only makes you the villain in their story. Instead, I turned back to my terminal. With 4 swift keystrokes, I aborted the API transfer sequence and logged completely out of the master administrative node. The screens flashed from dense text to the generic corporate login page. Then, I reached down to the secure port on the side of the console. I gripped the heavy, titanium encrypted USB drive and pulled it out. This drive contained my personal authentication certificate. It was the only cryptographic digital signature that the Federal Aviation Oversight Board recognized for Apex Meridian. Without it, the company could not verify a single piece of data. I dropped the drive into the depths of my leather satchel. Next, I unclipped my corporate identification badge from my lapel and let it fall onto the glass desk. The plastic hit the surface with a sharp, final clatter. Julian narrowed his eyes, clearly offended by my total lack of begging or crying. "Leave the premises right now," he snapped, puffing out his chest to look intimidating. "Or I will have corporate security forcefully escort you out of the building like a trespasser." I stood up slowly. I grabbed my bag, looking at Julian's puffed-up chest and Sloane's smug, clueless smile. I felt a deep, profound sense of peace, knowing exactly what was going to happen next. I gave them a faint, icy smirk. "Have a very colorful afternoon," I said, and walked out the door, leaving them alone with a machine they had absolutely no idea how to operate. The glass doors of the Apex Meridian headquarters slid shut behind me for the last time. I crossed the busy downtown avenue and stepped into a small, artisanal coffee shop directly opposite the towering glass monolith of my former employer. I ordered a large hot Americano, paid in cash, and deliberately chose a quiet corner table by the front window. From this exact vantage point, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the executive floors of the Apex building. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the bitter, scalding coffee, opened my personal laptop, and connected to the secure public data streams provided by the Federal Aviation Oversight Board. I did not need access to their internal company network to know what was coming. I only needed to watch the Federal Flight Status Registry. The digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked forward, second by second. It was a silent countdown, and I had the best seat in the house, high above the city, inside the climate-controlled server room I had meticulously maintained for years. Sloane was busy destroying a decade of carefully constructed compliance architecture. According to the panicked text messages I would later receive from a junior technician who was helplessly watching the disaster unfold, her first order of business was installing a third-party, cloud-based visual management tool directly over the heavily secured federal reporting framework. She absolutely hated the stark, high-contrast interface of the aviation diagnostic software. To her, a flashing red warning indicator regarding a microscopic pressure drop in a hydraulic line was not a critical safety alert that required immediate mechanical intervention. It was simply an ugly, aggressive color that clashed with her desired pastel aesthetic. "These red flashing boxes are causing entirely too much negative psychological pressure for the technical team," Sloane reportedly announced to the bewildered IT assistant who had been dragged into the room. "We need to foster a stress-free environment, mute all critical alerts, and changed the default warning color to a calming lavender. She began clicking through the master terminal, indiscriminately suppressing mandatory maintenance logs. She was systematically blinding the airline, turning off the very sensors that told the mechanics when a turbine blade was stressed, when landing gear required lubrication, or when a cargo door seal was compromised. She thought she was organizing a digital mood board. Exactly 2 hours after I walked out of that building, the automated systems at the Federal Aviation Oversight Board initiated their routine twilight sweep. This was a non-negotiable federal protocol. Every evening, before the massive overnight cargo fleet was cleared for departure, the government servers reached out to the airline servers to verify the encrypted digital signature of the chief system compliance engineer. It was a digital handshake that essentially said, "I swear under penalty of federal law that these aircraft are safe to fly." The federal servers pinged Apex Meridian. They looked for my titanium USB drive. They looked for my unique cryptographic hash. They found absolutely nothing. Up in the master terminal, a massive, unclosable prompt overrode Sloan's brand new pastel interface. It was a stark white box with bold black letters. It read, "Critical error. Certificate not found. Federal clearance denied." For a normal, functioning professional in the aviation industry, this message would induce a cold sweat and an immediate, panicked response. For Sloan, it was merely an annoying pop-up ruining her clean desktop. She did not read the text. She did not comprehend the immense legal gravity of the prompt. She simply dragged her mouse across the screen and clicked the tiny button labeled Ignore, swatting away a mandatory federal aviation blockade exactly as if she were dismissing a spam notification for a dietary supplement on her smartphone. The consequences of that single, ignorant click rippled across the country at the speed of light, down in the sweltering heat of the Miami Transit Hub, and across the windy tarmac of the Dallas Logistics Center. The first wave of heavy cargo planes finished loading, massive aluminum pallets of highly perishable goods, vital medical supplies, and high-priority electronics were strapped down in the holds. The ground crews pulled the chocks away from the massive rubber tires. Everything was ready for the night shift. In the cockpits, veteran pilots reached for their overhead panels to initiate the auxiliary power units and load their flight plans into the central navigation computers. But instead of the familiar hum of awakening avionics, their screens flashed a solid, glowing amber. The navigation systems were completely hard-locked. The onboard computers had received a direct automated command from the Federal Registry: grounding order active. No flight plan could be loaded. No engine could be ignited. The planes were effectively turned into multi-million-dollar paperweights. Chaos erupted on the ground. Frontline maintenance technicians, flight dispatchers, and confused captains scrambled for their radios and cell phones. They frantically dialed the Central Compliance Office back in Chicago to figure out why the entire overnight fleet was suddenly paralyzed. Back in my old server room, the dedicated red emergency landline began to ring. Then the secondary lines lit up. A chorus of ringing phones filled the sterile air. Sloan, intensely irritated by the noise, let out an exasperated sigh. "This is so disruptive," she complained to Julian, who was busy admiring his reflection in the dark glass of a server rack. "Route all incoming calls to the general voicemail immediately. I really need to focus on setting up my workspace without all these toxic interruptions." Down in the cafe, I took another sip of my coffee and watched the Public Federal Registry Board on my laptop screen. One by one, the flight statuses for Apex Meridian began to change from scheduled to grounded. The silent countdown had ended, the bomb had detonated, and they did not even know they were on fire yet. The contagion spread with mechanical, unforgiving precision, every 15 minutes, like the relentless strike of an executioner's bell. Another cluster of aircraft fell victim to the digital plague. At 10:15 in the evening, the heavy freighters in Atlanta were abruptly grounded on the tarmac. At 10:30, the entire West Coast logistics hub in Seattle went completely dark. By 11 o'clock, the paralysis was absolute and undeniable. Out on the sweltering runways across the southern states, tons of deep-freeze pharmaceutical cargo, including highly sensitive vaccines and life-saving medical supplies, began to inch dangerously close to their critical temperature limits as the auxiliary power units on the planes were denied ignition. Massive shipments of perishable agricultural goods and high-end priority electronics, the kind of contracts that guaranteed next morning delivery or incurred massive financial penalties running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour, were trapped behind locked aluminum cargo doors. The dominoes were falling rapidly, and they were taking the entire operational reputation of the airline down with them in a spectacular freefall. Up in the Chicago headquarters, the fragile illusion of control finally shattered into a million pieces. Julian realized something was catastrophically wrong, not because he suddenly understood the blinking error codes on the screens, but because his personal cell phone erupted with a sound that cut through the sterile room. It was not a junior mechanic calling this time. It was the chief director of air traffic operations, a hardened, no-nonsense industry veteran who absolutely did not care about Julian's last name or his father's money. When Julian answered, the director did not offer a polite corporate greeting. He unleashed a blistering barrage of furious profanity, demanding to know why the federal database was suddenly declaring the entire fleet of 120 aircraft fundamentally unsafe to fly. "What do you mean we are grounded?" Julian yelled into the receiver, his arrogant, relaxed posture dissolving instantly into frantic, erratic pacing. "Just tell the pilots to override the system manually. We have massive schedules to meet." The director's voice echoed through the tiny speaker so loudly that Sloane actually dropped her iced matcha latte onto the pristine floor. "You cannot override a federal aviation lockdown, you absolute idiot!" the director roared, his voice cracking with stress. "The planes are hard-locked from the ground. The feds pulled our clearance. Fix it right now, or we lose our operating license by midnight." Panic is a fascinating thing to observe in real time. It violently strips away fancy titles and expensive tailored suits, revealing the terrified, incompetent amateur underneath. Julian frantically slammed the phone down and hit the emergency panic button, summoning the entire internal information technology crisis team to the server room. Within 10 agonizing minutes, half a dozen senior software engineers and network administrators stormed into the suite. They shoved past a bewildered, frozen Sloane and immediately dove into the master administrative terminals, their fingers flying across the keyboards in a desperate bid to regain control. But their frantic keystrokes quickly slowed to a defeated, terrifying halt. The lead engineer, a veteran programmer with heavy bags under his eyes and a deep, intimate understanding of federal compliance laws, turned to Julian with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. "Where is Everly?" the lead engineer demanded, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed at the flashing red monitor. "She is gone," Julian snapped, waving his hand dismissively while sweating through his expensive shirt. "She was fired this afternoon. Just bypass her security protocols and get the damn planes in the air." The engineer let out a hollow, bitter laugh that sent a chill through the room. "Bypass it? Are you completely out of your mind? That application programming interface encryption is federally bound to her biometric identity and her unique cryptographic signature. It is a strict government standard. Without her specific digital authorization, this system automatically assumes the planes are structurally compromised. I cannot forge a federal aviation certificate. No engineer in this building is going to sign a document claiming these planes are safe without the verified diagnostic data to back it up. That is a federal crime that carries a 20-year prison sentence." The devastating reality of the situation finally crashed down on Sloane. The soft pallets and positive energy she wanted to implement evaporated into thin air. She stared at the blinding red alert screens, her lower lip trembling uncontrollably as the sheer magnitude of the disaster settled in. The thousands of grounded flights, the ruined cargo, the screaming phones. It was entirely too much for her carefully curated, artificial reality to handle. She burst into loud, ugly tears, completely ruining her immaculate, expensive makeup. "This is all your fault, Julian!" Sloane shrieked, backing away from the computer consoles as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. "You gave me a broken system. You set me up to fail. This software is completely buggy and defective, and I am absolutely not taking the blame for your terrible, incompetent company," before Julian could even attempt to calm his hysterical fiancée. The situation escalated from a corporate disaster to a waking familial nightmare. His cell phone buzzed again, vibrating violently against the glass desk. This time, the caller identification displayed a private international number. It was Richard Vance, the chief executive officer of Apex Meridian, his father. Richard was supposed to be on a luxury yacht off the coast of Monaco, enjoying a lavish 3-week European vacation. Instead, he had just been violently awakened by an emergency call from the board of directors, who informed him that his airline was currently hemorrhaging tens of millions of dollars by the hour, all because his son had somehow triggered a fleet-wide federal grounding. Julian slowly picked up the phone, his hand shaking so violently he could barely press the accept button. He did not even get the chance to say hello or offer a pathetic excuse. The sheer volume and intensity of the rage radiating from the earpiece forced Julian to hold the phone several inches away from his head. His father's voice was a terrifying, guttural roar that promised complete and utter destruction of Julian's entire life. The golden boy was finally facing the catastrophic fire he had started, and he had absolutely no idea how to put it out. My personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the smooth wooden surface of the cafe table. It danced across the polished wood, buzzing with a desperate, frantic energy that perfectly mirrored the catastrophic meltdown happening inside the glass tower across the street. I let it ring. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my Americano, letting the bitter warmth wash over my tongue. I watched the digital screen light up with the caller identification. It was a blocked number, but I knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. When the phone finally stopped its electronic screaming, it immediately started vibrating again. It was a relentless, pathetic assault. On the 5th consecutive attempt, I reached out, swiped the glass screen to accept the call, and simultaneously tapped the hidden icon to activate my secure audio recording software. I needed every single word of this upcoming conversation heavily documented for the inevitable legal fallout that was destined to follow. "Everly!" Julian barked through the tiny speaker. His voice was an abrasive, ugly mix of misplaced authority and barely suppressed terror. I was still desperately trying to play the role of the untouchable corporate executive, but his breathing was heavy, ragged, and entirely out of his control. "You need to get back to the office right this instant. You left a catastrophic bug in the compliance software before you walked out today, and it is completely locking up our entire national dispatch system. I am formally ordering you to return and fix the massive mess you made. If you do not resolve this immediately, our legal team will sue you into absolute oblivion for corporate sabotage and the intentional destruction of company property." I leaned back in my comfortable chair, gazing out the large glass window at the distant flashing lights of emergency maintenance vehicles, pulling up to the Apex Meridian building. I smiled softly to myself. "Good evening, Julian," I replied, my voice completely flat, calm, and devoid of any emotional inflection. "I highly suggest you consult with your aggressive legal department before making baseless, slanderous accusations on a federally recorded line. I did not leave any bugs in your software. There is absolutely nothing broken. The compliance system is functioning flawlessly, exactly as it was designed to operate. It recognized a completely unauthorized, uncredentialed user attempting to blindly bypass mandatory federal safety protocols, and it locked the structural doors to prevent a disaster. It is simply executing its fundamental security logic. You are experiencing the consequences of the system working perfectly." There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. Through the receiver, I could clearly hear the chaotic background noise of the server room. Frantic technicians were shouting over each other. Automated alarms were blaring their warning tones, and I could hear the undeniable heavy sounds of a massive empire bleeding millions of dollars in revenue by the second. When Julian finally spoke again, the arrogant executive persona had completely shattered into dust. He was no longer giving arrogant orders. He was a broken man begging for a lifeline. "Please," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that was almost embarrassing to witness. "You have to come back. The federal agents are threatening to permanently revoke our operating license before midnight. My father is going to absolutely destroy my entire life. Look, I will double your previous salary. No, wait, I will pay you 5 times your original salary. Just tell me what you want. I will draft a brand new ironclad contract right now. You can have the highest executive title for your division. And Sloan, I will fire her right now. I will have the building security throw her out onto the street immediately. Just bring that encrypted drive back here and unlock my planes." It was deeply fascinating and utterly repulsive to witness how quickly a man of his supposed stature would completely abandon the woman he planned to marry, throwing her under the bus the very second his own neck was placed on the chopping block. I took another slow sip of my coffee, quietly savoring the absolute desperation radiating from his voice. "Julian," I said smoothly, cutting through his frantic, pathetic rambling with surgical precision. "You clearly do not understand how this industry works, or what my job actually entails. I do not sell my federal safety certification signature to people who treat human lives and strict government laws like a casual puzzle game. You specifically stated that you wanted a more colorful workspace. You demanded a system built on positive energy and soft aesthetics. You got exactly what you asked for. Enjoy the vibrant colors of a complete operational shutdown." Before Julian could formulate another pathetic, desperate bribe, I heard a sharp, violent scuffle over the phone. Sloan had clearly ripped the device straight out of his sweating hand. "You are an absolute monster!" she shrieked into the microphone, her voice shrill, hysterical, and completely devoid of any self-awareness regarding her own catastrophic actions. "You planned this whole thing. You are a ruthless, scheming saboteur trying to ruin our company and destroy my personal brand reputation just because you were completely jealous of my creative vision." I let her scream into the digital void for exactly 3 seconds. I did not offer a single word of rebuttal. I did not waste another ounce of my breath trying to explain the harsh reality of her own blistering incompetence. I simply smiled, pressed the glowing red button on my screen, and ended the call. The line went dead with a quiet click. I securely saved the encrypted audio file to my personal cloud storage, closed the lid of my laptop, and looked out into the night. I left them entirely alone, completely abandoning them to drown in the massive, consuming fire they had so eagerly ignited with their own 2 hands. Julian Vance was backed into an impossible corner, and cornered animals are exceptionally dangerous, staring at the absolute destruction of his inherited empire, and facing the wrath of a father who would gladly feed him to the wolves to save the stock price. Julian crossed the invisible, unforgiving boundary between gross corporate negligence and outright federal treason. The atmosphere inside the server room shifted from chaotic panic to a suffocating, deeply sinister tension. He cornered the exhausted lead network administrator against a bank of humming cooling fans. Julian demanded the absolute unthinkable. He explicitly ordered the engineering team to dig through the deep storage archives, extract an outdated system backup from exactly 3 months prior, and deploy illegal, dark web-grade internet protocol spoofing software to artificially clone my unique cryptographic signature. He wanted them to build a digital ghost to deceive the federal government. The lead engineer went completely pale, his hands shaking violently as he vigorously shook his head. "Julian, you are asking me to commit federal identity theft and cyber fraud against a government oversight agency," the engineer whispered, his voice cracking under the immense psychological pressure. "If we spoof her credentials and push fake diagnostic telemetry, that is a direct violation of national security protocols. I will absolutely not go to federal prison for your mistakes. You will do exactly as I say, or I will personally ensure you never work in this industry again," Julian roared, slamming his fist against the metal server chassis. "I will bankrupt your family. I will bury you in civil lawsuits until you are living on the street. Do it right now." Intimidated, terrified, and fearing for his immediate livelihood, the engineer reluctantly surrendered. His fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the malicious scripts that would forge my digital identity. The room held its collective breath as the illegal code compiled, forcing the internal network to wear a hollow mask of my secure credentials. For a brief, fleeting moment, the desperate digital heist appeared to work flawlessly. The blinding red error messages that had plagued the master terminal abruptly vanished, replaced by a soothing, vibrant green status bar. The internal dispatch software, blindly trusting the spoofed authentication, automatically pushed the flight clearances down the line. Sloane let out a sharp, hysterical laugh of profound relief, throwing her arms around Julian's neck. They actually celebrated, high-fiving each other in the center of the room, entirely convinced they had outsmarted a federal security apparatus and permanently defeated me. They genuinely believed their sheer willpower and extreme wealth had rewritten the rigid rules of reality. Down on the sweltering tarmacs in Dallas, Miami, and Atlanta, the localized lockdown commands suddenly lifted. The bewildered captains, eager to salvage whatever was left of their ruined overnight schedules, immediately fired up their massive turbine engines. The deafening roar of jet fuel combusting echoed across the concrete. One by one, 3 colossal cargo freighters, each weighing over 300,000 pounds and loaded with highly sensitive materials, accelerated down the runways and violently tore into the pitch-black night sky. Julian proudly watched the digital tracking map on the wall monitor light up with 3 moving icons. He smiled, completely certain he had won the war. I had absolutely no idea that he had just stepped squarely on a digital landmine. When you engineer security protocols for the heavy aviation sector, you do not just protect against outside hackers in foreign countries. You must protect the system from the dangerous, incompetent people inside the building. Months prior, I had hard-coded a deeply buried, totally invisible architecture into the core root directory of the Apex Meridian network. It was a dead man's switch. It was a silent, lethal alarm designed specifically to detect internal cryptographic cloning. If the federal compliance system detected my exact digital signature originating from an unauthorized internal proxy server rather than my physical, encrypted titanium drive, it did not just lock the doors. It automatically assumed the airline's mainframe had been violently compromised by hostile actors, sitting outside in the cool night air. My encrypted smartphone vibrated a single time in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. A stark, crimson notification flashed in the darkness. It was an automated, priority message from my dead man's switch, confirming that a severe unauthorized cloning event was actively taking place inside the Apex Meridian network. It also confirmed that a direct, uninterceptable red alert had just been fired straight to the Central Cybercrime Investigative Division of the Federal Aviation Oversight Board. I let out a long, heavy sigh. I felt a fleeting moment of deep pity for the junior engineers who had been ruthlessly bullied into pulling the trigger. But Julian had chosen this specific fate for himself. I opened my laptop one last time. I quickly and methodically uploaded my complete, unalterable, time-stamped server access logs to 3 separate, highly secure offshore cloud vaults. This was my ironclad alibi. It was raw. Mathematical proof that my administrative access had been completely severed exactly 4 hours before the federal forgery ever occurred. I was preparing my impenetrable armor for the brutal legal war that would dawn in the morning. While I secured my digital alibi on the ground, Julian's momentary victory in the sky turned into an unprecedented, terrifying nightmare. The Federal Aviation Oversight Board did not treat the spoofed signal as a simple corporate compliance error, because the signature was an illegal clone. The Federal Automated Defense Systems classified the event as an active, hostile cyber hijacking. Someone had forcefully taken remote control of 3 massive aircraft using stolen federal credentials. That extreme classification immediately transferred legal jurisdiction from the Civilian Aviation Board directly to the Department of Defense. 30,000 feet above the American heartland, the captains of the 3 cargo planes suddenly lost all radio communication with the Apex Meridian Dispatch Center. Their headsets crackled violently, completely overriding all civilian frequencies. A cold, heavily automated, authoritative voice pierced through the static. It was military air traffic control. Apex Heavy Freighter. You are currently operating under a severely compromised federal security status. You are suspected of cyber hijacking. You are ordered to execute an immediate 180-degree turn and initiate an emergency descent. Before the terrified commercial pilots could even process the impossible transmission, the dark, empty sky outside their cockpit windows was shattered by the blinding, roaring afterburners of military fighter jets. Two heavily armed interceptors aggressively flanked each cargo plane, flying so dangerously close that the civilian pilots could clearly see the air-to-air missiles strapped to their wings. The military pilots did not issue polite corporate warnings. They commanded the massive freighters to land immediately at the nearest secured Air Force bases, under the explicit, terrifying threat of being shot directly out of the sky. Julian Vance thought he was simply playing a ruthless game of corporate politics to save his fragile ego. Instead, he had effectively launched a simulated cyber attack against the federal government, and the military had just arrived in the sky to collect the absolute ultimate debt. The flashing lights I had observed from the safety of the coffee shop window were not local maintenance trucks arriving to fix a broken server. They were a massive fleet of black tactical vehicles belonging directly to the Federal Cybercrime Division. By the time I calmly walked across the street and entered the cavernous glass lobby of the Apex Meridian headquarters, with my legal counsel walking firmly by my side, the entire corporate building was locked down under federal authority. Heavily armed agents were systematically securing every floor, every hard drive, and every terminal. I rode the executive elevator up to the main server hub, stepping into a scene of absolute spectacular devastation. Julian Vance was pinned forcefully against the very server racks he had claimed to own. A stern federal investigator was tightly ratcheting a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around Julian's wrists. The golden boy of the aviation industry was openly sobbing, his ridiculously expensive tailored suit ruined by nervous sweat and the dust of the server room floor. The lead agent loudly read his charges to the silent, terrified room, citing severe violations of national security, intentional forgery of federal aviation safety certificates, and the reckless endangerment of domestic airspace. When Julian saw me standing casually by the glass doorway, his absolute terror violently morphed into a pathetic, desperate rage. He thrashed against the heavy grip of the federal agents. "It was her!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking hysterically, echoing off the cold walls. "She is a disgruntled employee. She planted malicious malware in the mainframe to sabotage this entire company because I fired her this afternoon. Arrest her right now. She is the one who hijacked the planes." I did not raise my voice. I did not even break my neutral expression. I simply nodded to my attorney. My lawyer stepped forward, opening a sleek leather briefcase, and calmly handed the lead federal investigator a crisp, pristine folder. Inside was the formal termination letter, physically signed by Julian himself, complete with a verified corporate timestamp. Right behind it was a thick stack of printed, undeniable server access logs. My client was violently terminated and had all of her administrative access completely revoked exactly 4 hours before the illegal cloning event took place, my lawyer stated, his voice ringing with cold, impenetrable authority. Furthermore, we have a legally recorded phone call from this evening where Mr. Vance explicitly ordered my client to return to the premises to fix his mistakes, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt she had absolutely no remote access. The digital footprints of the illegal spoofing software trace directly back to the very internal terminal Mr. Vance is currently standing next to. It is mathematically and physically impossible for my client to have executed this catastrophic breach. The federal agent meticulously reviewed the documents, looked at the verified timestamps, and then slowly looked back at Julian with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Julian's desperate accusation instantly crumbled into a pathetic, childish joke. He was utterly trapped by the very paper trail he had arrogantly created. Seeing the corporate ship rapidly sinking to the bottom of the ocean, Sloane made her final, cowardly move. The fierce, demanding lifestyle influencer who had wanted to redecorate a federal compliance system just hours ago suddenly transformed into a helpless, fragile victim. She backed away from Julian, heavy tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face, furiously shaking her head. "I have absolutely nothing to do with this," Sloane cried out, throwing her hands up in the air as if surrendering to the agents. "I am just a lifestyle content creator. Julian completely lied to me. He tricked me into coming here and forced me to click on those horrible screens. I did not know what I was doing. I am just a victim of his toxic corporate manipulation." Without even looking back at the man she had promised to marry, Sloane turned and sprinted out of the server room, pushing past the bewildered federal agents to save her own skin and protect her precious social media brand. She completely abandoned her fiancé to face a mountain of federal prison time entirely alone. The fallout over the next few weeks was swift, brutal, and totally uncompromising. By sunrise the following morning, the Federal Aviation Oversight Board officially revoked the operating license of Apex Meridian indefinitely. When the stock market opened, the company's shares plummeted into a catastrophic freefall, wiping out billions of dollars in valuation in a matter of minutes. Richard Vance was forced to abruptly abandon his luxury European vacation, returning in disgrace to a completely decimated empire. To pay off the massive breach of contract penalties from the ruined cargo shipments, and to fund the astronomical legal defense fees required to keep his spoiled son out of a maximum security federal penitentiary. Richard had to sell the gutted remains of his airline for absolute pennies on the dollar. The mighty Apex Meridian was completely erased from the sky. 2 months later, I walked into a vastly different building. The polished marble halls of the central headquarters for the Federal Aviation Oversight Board in Washington radiated a quiet, serious power. I sat in a massive corner office, directly across from the chief director of the entire agency. He had personally reviewed the forensic data of the Apex disaster and was deeply impressed by the impenetrable security switch I had engineered. He slid a heavy gold-embossed folder across his desk. It was an employment contract for the newly created position of Head of Cyber Safety Inspection, complete with supreme executive privileges and top-secret security clearance. I signed my name on the dotted line without hesitation. I stood up, shook the director's hand, and walked over to the massive window overlooking the distant National Airport runways. I took a deep breath, savoring the quiet, undeniable victory. I watched a massive heavy transport plane accelerate down the tarmac and lift gracefully into the clouds. It was a beautiful sight, knowing that the systems keeping that incredible machine in the air were absolutely secure, protected by cold, hard data, and flying in a sky that was finally swept completely clean of arrogant fools. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are all listening from, so please let me know your city or country down in the comments. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has disabled our monetization, which means we absolutely will not upload any new videos here in the near future, and we are transitioning completely to Patreon. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us keep producing these high-quality narrations, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. Over there, you will get to hear the absolute best, highly detailed, exclusive true stories with incredible emotional voice acting that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join our amazing community right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I will see you all over on Patreon.